and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Jack and Ezra will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out directly either to the analyst or myself at the end of the webinar to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the presentation. You can also find these slides, as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight, and we'll share all the social media links with you again at the end of our presentation. Now let me introduce Jack Narkata and Ezra Gottheil. Jack has more than 15 years in the IT industry, which ranges from the early days of Ethernet and telecommunications to the current revolution in mobile technology. As an analyst in TBR's computing practice, Jack is primarily responsible for reporting on hardware vendors such as Motorola, Nokia, Samsung, and Sony, as well as focusing on trends and opportunities within the Chrome, Android, and iOS ecosystems. Ezra leads our coverage of HP hardware, Lenovo, and Apple, and is a principal researcher on projects including consumer and business tablets, PC warranties, PC supply chains, mobile device strategies, mobile device management, app stores, and social networking. He's been covering the computing industry for over 20 years, and his insight has proven invaluable to our hardware clients. And with that, let me hand this over to Ezra.
Thank you, Allison. I'm going to deliver the presentation today, and Jack will be joining us for the Q&A. We have seen a sea change in the device marketplace, in the mobile device marketplace. After many, many quarters of very rapid growth, we've seen a sudden slowdown in the growth of both smartphones and tablets. And that has resulted in a considerable change in the market. One of the changes being a search for new devices and new form factors. We have new devices, new things that have never been sold before or only have been sold in earlier forms. And I'm calling those inventions, although there's a lot of invention continuing to go into the existing kinds of devices. And we have proliferation, which is the expanding of the product lines to different sizes and shapes and capabilities of the existing mainstream products. We will be discussing both. The environment is ready and the market is ready for both these things, for new kinds of devices and for different forms of the existing kinds of devices. We'll talk about what will make for a successful new device or a successful newly introduced form factor. Then we'll talk about what's going on now, where the action is, and where we see the action in the next year or so. And finally, we'll talk about the maturing market that is having so much to do with the expansion into new devices and new form factors. The world is ready for this right now because the technology is ready. For everything from the various forms of communication, 4G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, near field, to screens, batteries, processors, etc. We have the tools with which to build new kinds of devices and to change the devices we have into a variety of forms. The smartphone has become the personal portable hub, the way the PC is the hub in the business and home environment. It's something through which other devices can communicate to other devices, to the cloud, to other users. And the users know what to do. They're ready for these kinds of devices. They have a sense of how to adopt to something new. That baby, by the way, is swiping. That's now become a developmental milestone, babies knowing how to use mobile devices. Let's talk a little bit about the market readiness. The companies, the vendors, are looking for two things. They're looking for differentiation, things that give them an advantage over their competition in the market for existing kinds of products. And they're looking for invention. They're looking to go in where there hasn't been a market before and invent some of their own white space. We will not see the kind of land rush, this capturing of market that we saw with smartphones in particular and with tablets. The smartphone was probably the fastest growing product, not just tech product in history. It was such an obvious need for those who could afford it that it took over the market by storm. what we will see in the new devices and in the new form factors is a much more gradual evolutionary adoption. It will grow out the market and create new opportunities, but nothing like the explosions we've seen before. And one of the implications for that is that there's a chance for the market to adapt, for later entries to take over early entries, et cetera. It will not be the explosive growth we've seen in the past. But the buyers are ready. The market is ready. They've understood, incorporated, and become satisfied with the kinds of products that are out there. They've even come to understand some of the variations. The tablet market, for instance, has spread out into the 3 major types of tablets and a variety of form factors, and the buyers understand them in ways they did not understand them as recently as a year ago. And now they're saying, what's new? What's more? Because these devices are more than just practical solutions. They're things that people want, they enjoy, they're looking for opportunities. There's more money available to be spent on these devices than there was a year or two ago. The global economy is somewhat improved. Consumer sentiment is considerably more positive. And the toy budgets, the budgets for buying these things, have been freed up as they've bought the ones they're going to buy, and they're ready to buy some more. So there's a lot of opportunity here in both new devices and new form factors. So in this context, what constitutes a winning strategy? How do you win in this market? I'm not going to give you any secrets. There's no secret sauce here. These are things you basically know. It's a review. These things are simple but difficult. So you need to provide upside for the buyer. Upside is almost always a killer app. If I ask you what your killer app is and you give me a list of more than 2, you don't have a killer app. This has to be the thing that makes the user want to buy the device. With the original smartphone, with the BlackBerry, that was email. With the next generation, with the original iPhone, that was web access. And with iPhone from after that generation, and with the newer smartphones, it's apps. There has to be something that the buyer wants and can understand. The buyer has to have tolerable downside. Downside isn't just the money they spend on the device. It's what they have to give up, the time they have to spend to learn or to move their files or to displace their ways of doing things, which means you have to provide the buyer a clear path from not having the device to having the device. This is one of the things that's happened in the world of technology that makes it possible to sell multiple devices to a user. The cloud storage and synchronization services have meant that having more than one device is no longer burdensome. That part of the path to a new device has been cleared. You have to make sure in presenting your new device that the user can make the transition without it being a problem. You have to communicate that. You have to tell a story. And the story isn't speeds, feeds, features. The story is how their lives will be better and different when they have the product. Apple has a new series of commercials for its tablets that I think they're very good because they paint a world of creativity and sharing. It's not about the device. It's about a life that's better and different with the new device. And finally, you have to have luck, and this, of course, is the thing that's hardest to come by. You can execute completely perfectly, and if your competitor executes slightly better and slightly ahead of you, you can lose. So there's a lot to be done here, but some of those things are absolutely out of the control of the vendor. So where's the action now in the world of new devices and new form factors? Well, what we've seen is the return of the keyboard. The tablet was an appealing device, and lots of buyers convinced themselves that glass keyboard was more than good enough, and I can do all my computing on this tablet, but it's just not true, except for a small subset of users. So keyboard devices, we've surveyed users repeatedly, and they say we love our tablets and we love them, love what they can do, but they don't do everything well. And one of the things they don't do is they don't afford a good mode of text input. We've seen the return of the keyboard in the success of Chrome OS, which has grown enormously over the last year. And we think we're going to see it with Apple. There's a rumor out today that Apple is going to come up with a split-screen multitask feature for iOS 8. If it has that, basically all it has to do is provide an appropriate connectable keyboard with a high-resolution pointing device, and they then have solved the lack of a keyboard in their devices. And the iPad with a really well-coupled keyboard is going to be a very attractive product. The other potential player in there is Microsoft and Microsoft-based devices with the operating system that was known as Windows RT. That really is a lightweight, touch-centric operating system that works well with a keyboard, and there's a real opportunity there. Then we talk about the differentiating form factors. So these are the existing kinds of products, the smartphones, tablets, and PCs, and how they can be evolved to become a really mature line of products. I think of the way that automobiles evolved from a few basic forms into a wide variety of shapes and sizes for different purposes and different users that still cluster around a few central useful form factors. And we're seeing that happen now with the larger smartphones. We're seeing that happen with tablets, which are migrating down in size. The 7 and 8 inch tablets are very successful size and are also beginning to migrate upward in size. I frankly think the 10 inch is going to be a relative dead spot in the market compared with somewhat smaller and somewhat larger than 10 inch. The larger ones accommodate a keyboard somewhat better. They're not as portable, but the 10 inches are relatively unportable compared with the 7 and 8 inches. We've seen a great evolution in the various ways and shapes that a PC with a touchscreen can be configured. And frankly, I can't find any real difference between a tablet with an associated keyboard and a docking 2-in-1. I think they're basically the same product. We talk about wearables, and I think there's a real barrier to wearables that until and unless they really become totally unobtrusive from the point of view of the person observing the wearer, they basically are a badge that says, you know, I'm a geek, I'm a tech nut. You look like you've been assimilated by the Borg if you're wearing Google Glass. Now, the other thing about the wearables, and Google Glass is a good example of this, is they may very well have an enormous set of applications in terms of specialized functions, either professional functions or intermittently as a user needs a constant input without glancing over at a separate device. There was a recent article about an emergency surgeon consulting Google Glass for allergy complications while still very involved with the patient. That sort of thing makes a lot of sense. But as a thing you wear day to day, you don't want to wear a badge that says that you basically are a tech person. The other thing is for the general user, there has not been a killer app for either watches or the glasses. And that's the reason that we don't see a lot of wearables. There's still a lot of potential there, but the killer app has not been identified and emerged. Then there's home things. So these are the Internet of Things that are used in the home. And the Nest, acquired by Google, is a key example of that sort of connected smart device, which I think will proliferate. I think that Nest itself is going to be very aggressive in exploring other applications. They've already gone into safety monitoring, even though there was a recall and a problem with their smoke and CO2 monitor, but they'll get that right, and other vendors will go in and play in that sphere as well. There's baby monitors, pet monitors. There's also potential in home networking, which frankly is an area, home wireless networking, an area where a lot of progress could be made. These things are not very usable, understandable, and maintainable by non-geek users. And finally, there's an opportunity in home telephony, IP telephony, and integration of cellular with Wi-Fi to conserve bandwidth and keep costs down. There's probably some very good opportunities in the world of devices that improve medical care and personal safety. Personal safety either from a security point of view or in terms of things like making sure you're awake while you're driving. Clearly, the car is a place where we're going to see a lot of new devices and integration of devices. But there was recently an article about a new filing, a new company coming out with a glasses that watch your eyes to alert you if you're beginning to nod off while driving. Now, the key here, the potential for rapid and large success, is these things do not necessarily have to be sold directly to the consumer. In the case of a medically useful device, in the case of a safety useful device, the insurance company can encourage and reward buyers for buying it. So it's not necessarily a matter of a consumer sale. It can be a kind of a no-brainer if basically your insurance company pays for your device. I want to talk now about the market dynamics that are helping propel the embracing of new form factors and new devices. And this segment is about smartphones, but it may also be happening with tablets. The last 2 quarters have seen a considerable deceleration in the growth of tablets. We can't know whether it's as complete as smartphones for another quarter or two, but at some point it will happen with tablets. So tablets took off like a rocket and are now really leveling off. There's been a big slowdown in unit sales, revenues, et cetera. They're still growing, but we believe they might not necessarily continue to grow. And there are 2 causes for this. This slowdown will cause, in turn, changing buying behavior, and that is already happening. And that requires an adoption by vendors of new strategies to meet the changing buyer behaviors. And then we'll talk a little bit about long-term strategies in the smartphone market. So here's the hard data point. This is what revenue growth has looked like in smartphones over the last, I think, 10 quarters. Smartphone sales growth has hit a wall. Smartphone sales have almost leveled off, and we believe it will continue. We believe the growth will actually go negative for a while, and then growth will resume, and we'll discuss why we think those are true, but we are not going to see that rocket ship take off ever again. So the 2 reasons. There's market saturation, and there's product maturation. And together they lead to what we may call an adjustment phase of the market. So this is a completely abstract figure. We don't have numbers to attach to it, either in terms of the time frame or in terms of percentage, but we think this is sort of the shape of the curve of the installed base of smartphones. And you start with a period of very rapid growth, which we recently went through. You hit the saturation point, which is basically where we are now. That is to say, among the people who can afford the data plans, almost all of them have smartphones. There's very few who haven't yet made that change. And from then on, you have slow growth, and that's based on the growth of the size of the market, population growth and economic growth, lower device prices, but lower data prices is most important. Data prices basically set the floor under the prices for the whole product. So that's one of the reasons you don't have a further growth. While device prices are continuing to go down very rapidly, and we just saw an introduction of is it $129, the Moto E?
Moto E, $129.
$129, no subsidy,
That's right.
Smartphone, and that's very much less expensive than the mainstream smartphones. The price of the data plan basically keeps these new lower price devices from expanding the market as much as they would if the price for ownership was falling to near zero. It's not anywhere close.
So if we look at the market penetration, now we're going to look at the unit sales, and here's where you see the actual decrease. You go through the period of very rapid growth. You get a little bit of a bump as LTE is rolled out in many geographies. We're about to see quite a surge of refreshes in China as LTE becomes broadly available through a lot of carriers who did not have it until recently. And then you hit the saturation point, and you actually have fewer new smartphone customers available. There's some replacement, but that's not what had driven the growth was new customers entirely. So you have replacements, and you have the population, economic growth, lower device and data prices, but the replacement cycles are beginning to lengthen, and we'll get into that. That comes from the product maturation, and the ASPs are declining. So when you look at revenue, you might well see a much more flat curve going forward. So let's talk about product maturation. We talked about saturation. Now we're talking about maturation. Saturation came from success, so does maturation. Basically, the saturation success was we sold a lot of them very quickly. There's not a lot of market left. The maturation success is we've innovated and improved these products to the point where they're all pretty darn good. And the performance is good enough. There used to be a matter of trying to buy the fastest, most powerful phone you could for a given price. Now you can kind of assume it. And the customers are therefore satisfied, and it's hard to differentiate among the mainstream vendors. And there are fewer reasons, therefore, to switch brands, which is one of the reasons that vendors have to change their strategy. Now, if new features mean less to customers, and therefore the product doesn't drive the brand, vendors have to look to market their brand in different ways. And there are fewer reasons to replace older handsets, except for changes like LTE that happen locally. So this is probably the single biggest problem, which is that replacement cycles are lengthening, and that's going to cause that decrease in sales before we hit a sort of semi-steady state. So let's quickly go through some of the changes in behavior. And these are things we have noted anecdotally. We are looking for opportunities to do research on that. In the past, customers saw performance. Now they assume it. Price was less important in the early days of this land rush. Now price is more important. Service was secondary to the power and attraction of the device. Now service is primary. Users they know what the device does. They're happy with the device. They're expecting to keep it a long time. Service is very important. There used to be many new features that excited customers. The new features now are not adding a lot to functionality, and customers aren't paying a lot of attention. It doesn't mean that a killer feature cannot be developed and invented. It's hard to think of one, but there are fewer opportunities. It's harder to come up with those. Customers then were looking for new things they could do with their devices. Now they want a device that doesn't challenge them, that basically does the job and gets out of the way. Design always mattered. Now it matters even more. And durability was not as important as it now is. So what do vendors have to do? They have to quickly be first to get the new customer. The customer who is going from feature to smartphone. Now they have to take customers from the competition. That's much harder. They have to in the past, vendors had to satisfy the network providers. Now they have to totally delight the network providers. They had to be an attractive choice for the network providers, and now they actually have to pull customers into the network providers and justify their choice as a way of actually bringing in customers. Apple pioneered in that, but that becomes a challenge for everyone else following. In the past, they added many new features. They have every rollout. You have a long list of features. Now you have to add killer features. They promoted the many new features, and now they have to explain the value of the dominant new feature. They used to build hero, top-of-the-line smartphones. Now they have to differentiate and build more custom to specific markets, specialized smartphones. In the past, they emphasized performance, and now they should emphasize reliability and durability. So what's a challenge for vendor strategy at this point? The problem here is that if most people already have a smartphone, and most smartphones are pretty good, customers will tend to stay loyal to their brand. The old message was a simple one. We've got a great smartphone. You buy your first smartphone, buy it from us. The new message gets a lot more complicated. You have to ask someone to say, don't buy the same smartphone you bought. Buy a new one. Switch to our brand. That's a better experience. It's not only a better experience, it's worth the difficulties, the challenge of switching, and that is a much higher hill to climb. That's what's driving the need to try to sell new products and differentiate the existing products. This need to get people either buy a new product that they're not having to switch, or to make the switch attractive to specific users through competition in form factors and features. That concludes the presentation. Now, are there any questions that Jack and I can address?
Great, thanks. There are a couple questions in queue, so I do encourage anyone, if there's any questions that you have on the presentation that you just listened to, please send them through now. The first question we have, guys, is what do you think of the impact of large tablets, such as the 13-inch model Samsung is expected to release in mid-2014? Will they be on the consumer and commercial tablet markets? Do you think they'll create a new product category or blur the line between tablets and PCs further?
Yeah, I definitely think it's the latter. This is Jack Narcotta, by the way. So it's an interesting, Samsung certainly has the ability to be able to kind of drive or create its own markets. We're seeing a lot of, especially within the smartphone business, it's a very risk-friendly R&D culture. A lot of new products are being created, and I think with the larger form factor tablets, in the case of Samsung, I really do feel like it's almost their default replacement for their PC business. And I think with the role of Windows in the Samsung ecosystem anyway, beginning to really kind of shrink from view as it continues to explore Android, as well as begins to ramp up some of its new Tizen capabilities, I think this is almost kind of a hedge of a bet on the future of the Windows or the PC form factor ecosystem. So I think it will certainly blur the line in the case of Samsung, but outside of that particular ecosystem, I'm not sure what the value of that product would be in the long term, especially for consumers, knowing that they, as Ezra mentioned earlier in his presentation, there's a great deal of value being assigned to a lightweight keyboard device that may have a similar screen size but also has a keyboard. So we'll start to see that product kind of conflict with some of the value propositions that 2-in-1s or any other tablet that Apple might produce that has an integrated keyboard, or any other vendor for that matter. So I think it's right now, I think it's likely to be a product without a home, but Samsung certainly has the ability to give that particular form factor some legs and more or less wait and see what happens in that particular market. If it gains traction, then it's a win for Samsung, and if not, the company returns back to what it's been doing very well over the last 5 years.
Okay, I'll wait for the question to come through. Proliferation versus convergence. What is the market moving towards? Less devices, e.g. superphone that can be docked and attached to a monitor and keyboard, or coexistence of multiple devices, best of breed?
I'll try to answer that. So when we see the growth of the smartphone to the point that it's meeting the shrinkage of the tablet in the middle, we ask, are we going to displace a whole category, or are we actually going to consolidate two kinds of devices? And this is not unheard of in the history of devices. I don't know how many of you remember PDAs, or for that matter, MP3 players. There are not many of either of those on the market anymore. Nevertheless, I think that what you will see is that in some markets, very cost-conscious markets, you will see the very large smartphone preempting the tablet. It's not clear, however, that the tablet would have ever sold into that market, because tablet is clearly the third most important device in the in the panoply. So we have three main devices, and the question is, are we going to lose one? And I think the answer is no. I think fundamentally, they're not best of breed. Every product is a compromise. I think when you talk about Windows tablets, you're basically talking about thin, flat PCs, so I think you basically get very close to 100% cannibalization there between PCs and tablets. But other than that, I think there is a place in the market for all three of these things. One of the reasons for that is the third one down on the list. You know, you need a PC or a keyboard device for productivity. You need a phone to be a phone. You need something that's really with you all the time. The third one on the list, the thing you need least, is a tablet. So that would be the vulnerable one. But the smaller Android tablets, and now to a certain extent Windows tablets, are so inexpensive that they basically are cost effective as a text reader. And only if you are extremely constrained in your spending will you use your phone as a text reader. We'll use something that's small enough to be with you all at the same time. So I think there's ongoing coexistence of those two form factors, those two devices.
What effect will Tizen have on the overall mobile ecosystem, and specifically for Samsung's relationship with Google?
You want to do that?
Yeah, sure. So there was news, I think it was earlier this morning, perhaps even later yesterday, that Samsung is very now widely expected to be releasing its first Tizen smartphones in Russia and in the country of India. So clearly it's more or less ready for prime time, but I think it's important to look at Tizen that it's not necessarily looking to replace the, let's call it, billion or billion and a half smartphones that have been sold over the last several years, but I think it's more positioning the company to get ready for what the next wave of subscribers will be. You know, I think Google is fond to say that they're building devices and services for the next billion users, and I think that's really what Samsung is doing. And certainly it does, for the Google relationship, put a little bit of a strain on it, but I think the magnitude to which, at this point, Samsung is looking to deploy Tizen is on such a smaller scale compared to what the addressable market is for Android that sort of in a similar vein to its play with the larger form factor, as much as the company is risk-friendly in R&D, it's also, because of its resources and its scale, it can tolerate a larger degree of risk in its go-to-market strategy. So should Tizen take off, certainly Samsung will put as many resources and as much financial backing behind it as it certainly would require to propel that further into the marketplace. But I think the effect will be establishing that there is a market for smartphones that, as we've seen with the release of the Moto E earlier today, that there definitely is a growing need to address this particular segment of the market. And the way the Android cost structure is for Samsung kind of requires them to take a little bit more control over their own ecosystem, and then by default be able to appeal to that next wave of customers that, as Ezra's charts mentioned throughout this presentation, as well as his commentary, that's really where the growth is expected to come from. So the bottom line for Samsung is a lot of the more of the same, in that it wants to play in as many markets as possible and ride the waves that are coming into the shore as opposed to the waves that may be on their way out.
Next question we have. How will foldable, bendable displays affect the rate of cannibalization of tablets by phone and phablets?
Well, this is Ezra Gottheil. I'll try to address that. If we get to truly foldable, then you're going to see the opportunity to displace a tablet. If I can easily fold out my phone to make a satisfactory book reading experience, then the tablet becomes somewhat less important. I see that as a considerable distance in time away from now. Bendable is an attractive aspect of these phones, but the real issue is this ongoing tension and trade-off between portability and screen size. If you can solve that, and I used to joke about inflatable monitors, you really can you can really bring products together.
Okay. Next question we have, what killer app or apps do Chrome devices need to become more of a legitimate computing platform instead of a consumer accessory? To play devil's advocate, does Chrome need to be a legitimate computing platform, or do you think it will always be more of a consumer-oriented play?
I'll take that one too,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I think Chrome is a legitimate platform. I think that there's only one real difference right now between the business applicability of a Chrome device and the business applicability of a Windows PC, and that is what is in Microsoft Office. And frankly, for most users, the online versions of the spreadsheets and word processors, most business users, most commercial users, the online versions of the spreadsheets and word processors, ones you can get from Microsoft as well as from Google, are more than adequate. But for some users, like the people here at TGR who build 50-tab spreadsheets, they need the horsepower of a Windows platform. The real gating factor in broader commercial adoption of Chrome OS is the email system. Outlook is the standard. Outlook is an enormous entrenched installed base. Outlook is the email system that you can store the email data wherever you like and move it around to wherever you want. All those things give Outlook a lot of strength and a lot of resistance to the erosion, and I think there is real erosion from Gmail, from hosted email. Outlook is also vulnerable because it is not a modern product, frankly, and the user experience of Gmail is far more positive than the user experience of Outlook. The real firewall right now against broad adoption of Gmail is that Gmail is hosted only by Google. If Google were to change that, you could see a much more rapid adoption of first Google apps and then Chrome OS.
Okay. We have one more question in queue, so if anyone has any questions, please do send them through now. The last question we have right now is, where will wearables play into commercial device decisions?
Oh, that's interesting. Wearables and commercial device decisions. So we see some vertical applications for the heads-up display of something like Google Glass. We talked about medical. You could also see it in things like maintenance, machinery maintenance. You could see it in public safety. You can certainly see, the military has used heads-up displays for a very long time. As I said, I think one real opportunity, one set of opportunities for wearables is in the medical sphere. So it's not so much that the healthcare workers would be wearing wearables, but if you can monitor important patient and potential patient measures through a wearable, through a wristband, through a pendant, that could become very valuable. Now it's being worn by everybody, including consumers, but it's really kind of a commercial application. The first step here isn't in the kind of interesting technology of predicting terrible events and identifying when a patient needs an intervention. The low-hanging fruit here is simply patient compliance. If you can increase compliance with medical instructions, you can improve healthcare and lower healthcare costs. That would be an incentive to incent your members to wear their bracelet or whatever. That's where I see some opportunities.
So it looks like we do not have any additional questions in queue, so with that I'll start to wrap up. As we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we will be sending out the slides to everyone by tomorrow afternoon, so please keep an eye out for that. If you do need the slides prior to that, please reach out to me and I will send you a private email with that attachment. Additionally, I'm going to share all the social media links with you, so I do encourage everyone to follow both Ezra and Jack as well as TBR on the Twitter handles listed here, as well as joining our communities on LinkedIn, SlideShare, and YouTube at the URLs listed above. On your way out of the presentation, there's a quick survey. How valuable was the presentation? How good were the presenters? And if there's any other topics or items that we should be considering for our research agendas or the webinar presentations, we do like to get your feedback and use that to tailor our presentations quarter to quarter. So that would be very helpful if you can give us that feedback. I'm going to leave the chat function open for another few minutes in case there's any last-minute questions or you'd like to set up additional conversations with either of the analysts around the benchmark data listed here. Excuse me. If we do not hear from you now, we'll look forward to speaking with you guys again next quarter. And if there are any questions that pop up between now and then, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a great afternoon.